Hitman is a new Netflix movie starring Glenn Powell, and actually, Glenn Powell has a writing credit on this, as well as director Richard Linklater, and then Skip Hollandsworth has the other writer credit on this film. As I gotta be honest, this is a movie that when I first started watching it was not that into. For one thing, it has that Netflix look, where I feel like everything just feels so clean, which is certainly not what I typically expect from a usual Linklater movie, so I wasn't that into that. And I thought at the beginning, the first kind of 8 minutes or so, the setup portion of this movie really did feel rushed, and I actually weirdly think that Glenn Powell, who has to play a lot of different types of characters in this movie, kind of think the one he did the least convincing job of was that initial character in the first, beginning portion of this film. In that beginning portion, we learn that Glenn Powell's character is kind of a bit of a nerdy type, which also I gotta say, I don't care how bad of a haircut you give him and put glasses on him, Glenn Powell just does not work as a nerd. He is far too good looking, in my opinion, to fully work in that aspect. But nevertheless, that's kind of what we learn. Okay, he's this nerdy type. He's a teacher, and kind of as a part-time job on the side, he's into tech. He designs like microphones and stuff, and because of that, he kind of got a side gig working with the police in a way to wire people. Usually the scenes go where when someone is wired, they have a fake hitman come out, and the person who thinks they hired a real hitman, they admit to the crime, they give some sort of payment, and then they get arrested because of it. However, when the usual fake hitman, Jasper, gets in trouble and gets suspended for 120 days with pay due to beating up high schoolers, I believe it was the reason, they have Glenn Powell's character, Gary Johnson. He is the guy who has to come in and beat a fake hitman for a day. And again, this is all in the first 8 minutes. Like I said, it felt a bit rushed for me, and I wasn't really sure how into this movie I was. But once this scene happened, I immediately turned and started enjoying this film. I mean, for one thing, that just creates an interesting situation, right? Of you have a character who thinks that they're hiring a real hitman. Glenn Powell's job is he has to convince the person that he is a real hitman and has to convince them to incriminate themselves. And if they say something incriminating, then he gets the arrest. So that alone just creates an interesting scene, right? There's tons of subtext throughout. That's just a fascinating scene. And what we learn in this as well is that Glenn Powell's character is actually really good at faking being someone else. And that's part of the fun of this movie, is he constantly goes through and pretends to be different types of people. A lot of them aren't like actual people, although there was like a Patrick Bateman impersonation. Even the subtitle said like Patrick Bateman impression or something like that. But, even if it wasn't just a specific person, it was like, oh, it's that kind of person. I know that guy, even if I don't know that guy, right? And that was a lot of the fun of this movie, was just seeing him, really, I think, kind of nail every single impersonation, which is why it was weird. I loved his, I really think it was just the looks aspect of it. I just feel like he's like too in good shape and too like good looking to pull off like a loner. I think they just needed spend a little more time convincing me of that personally at the beginning. But yeah, every other little aspect here, I thought he nailed every other part of the performance. And some of these things, I'm like, man, he really does feel like a different person when you're watching him just through performance and, makeup and hairstyling and all that stuff. But still, it was very fun. But that alone, while certainly it made me enjoy the movie a lot more, that would not have made the movie in itself. I think what really sets this movie apart from a lot of other quote-unquote fun movies that have come out in recent months, if not recent years, is I really feel like this is a movie that fully commits to what its premise is. We're getting into mild spoiler territories. I think this does happen around 40 minutes in, but it also does it's part of the plot, so I kind of have to talk about it. So I'll be vague, but if you're particularly spoil adverse, this might be the time to check out. But, again, I'm not spoiling anything, just giving up some plot details to happen maybe midway through, or like a third of the way through. Glenn Powell meets Adria Arjona is maybe how you say her name, who, Madison is the character's name. Madison is looking to murder her abusive husband, is at least her telling of the story. However, Glen Powell's character talks her out of it and they end up dating, but Glen Powell does it as pretending to be a hitman, not as Gary Johnson, the police officer, or I guess guy who works for the police, which, you know, we've seen before, right? We've seen 100 times it's a relationship, but one of the persons initially lied about who they were, and then it gets stuck in the lie. And a lot of times those situations, like those types of movies, are just cliche and not that interesting. I think one reason why those stories don't always work for me is sometimes it's like, oh, I told her I'm an ice cream scooper, but I'm actually like a barista. I can't, if she knows, she won't date me anymore. And it's kind of like, you could probably just tell her. You could probably just let that information go. But in this scenario, you really couldn't. I mean, for one thing, I think that's a pretty big lie, saying you're a hitman, but it's also made explicitly clear that part of what Madison likes about Glen Powell's character is the fact that he is a hitman. And part of what Glen Powell likes about his own character that he's playing as the hitman is it allows him to be himself, and he doesn't act like Gary Johnson. And I think that's really where this movie thrives. Because cliches exist for a reason, and tropes exist for a reason, because they usually create for some interesting drama. And this is something that fully goes with those tropes and those cliches, and I wouldn't say it in a negative way. I would say in a positive way, because it reaches kind of their full potential and takes a trope that we've seen before, and I'm not going to say twist it that much, just like fully reaches its full potential of that trope, which I thought was really fun. But I would also say that even with that, if that's all the movie was, I still don't know if I would be as high on it as I ultimately am. Because what I think sets this movie apart is really what it's kind of exploring, which is, can you change yourself as a person? When Glen Powell's character decides to, instead of being a nerdy guy, pretend to be a charismatic, likable guy, he pulls that off. And at what point do you stop being the nerdy guy and start being the charismatic, likable guy? And that question is really interestingly explored throughout the course of this movie. If it feels like I've explained the whole movie, I promise you I have not. There is a lot more that goes into it. And one of my favorite things about this movie is just where it goes with its story. It is really a fearless screenplay in a lot of ways, and isn't afraid to, to go in certain directions that I did not expect it to go into. And some of the scenes, including a scene I won't spoil, but with a phone late in the movie, is like as suspense building of a scene as you will see. I heard some people complain that they didn't fully feel for the romantic leads. They didn't fully care if they got together. I did care. I was rooting for them to stay together, which I don't always do in romantic movies, but this one did certainly work for me. This film worked for me in a way I was not expecting it to work when I first turned it on. In fact, I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10, and while we're still, not even midway through the year, and usually the best movies come out towards the end of the year, I think this is probably my favorite movie so far of the year. I think I liked it more than Challengers, which is saying something because I like Challengers a lot too. But I thought this was great. I still think that there could have been the setup part. I think they could have done a little better. That's probably my biggest critique of it, and I shouldn't say done better. It didn't fully work for me, is what I really mean. But the twists and turns this movie makes, the great subtext and the unique use of kind of having characters be in situations where they probably shouldn't be in, and out of their element, really was fascinating. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of another Richard Linklater movie in a sense, of School of Rock, where it's just like, okay, not a lot of what you're doing here is stuff I've never seen before, but some of it is, and it's just like really well done that I still really like it. So like, that's kind of my view of Hitman. It's on Netflix, so you don't have to leave your house to watch it if you don't want to. It's, I think, definitely worth the watch, and I was very pleasantly surprised by Hitman. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Richard Linklater's Hitman. Let me know in the comments below, what were your thoughts on it if you have seen it. Always love hearing from y'all. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.